Hi guys, it's me Swastik, and this is the ultimate guide to buttons with Discord.py or Pycord. This video will teach you everything that there is about buttons, and you'll be able to create anything that you want with buttons. So let's first take a look at the requirements. You will need Python 3.8 or above. You will need Discord.py 2.0 or Pycord 2.0 or above. And some of you might not know this, but Discord.py has been discontinued. And if you want to know more about it, you can watch this video in the card. So I'll be using Pycord in this video. And at the time of recording this, Pycord 2.0 isn't out on Swas.py yet. So you'll need to install it through git, pip install git plus and the repo URL. And if you're using Discord.py, then you will also need to install it through git because Discord.py 2.0 is only available on GitHub. It will never be released on Swas.py. Now, if you're watching this in the future, Pycord 2.0 or above might be released on Swas.py. So if you see that Pycord is 2.0 or above, then you can install it through Swas.py, which would be simply pip install Pycord. And finally, you'll also need to know about Python and Discord.py. So let's begin. So first, let's take a look at the types of buttons that are available. We have the blue button, the green button, the gray button, and the red button, which are called destructive, secondary, primary, success, and primary. And there is a special type, which is the link button. And you can also have emojis next to the labels. And you can also disable each of the buttons. Now that we know how the buttons look like and we know what they are called, let's add them to our code. So here I have a very simple bot in a main.py file and a config.py file where I have the token. So I run the bot with the token from the config file. And here are the imports, which is simply import discord and from discord.exe import commands. And we have the bot, which has the command prefix of these three arrows. And we have a very simple command hello, which just says hi. So how do we create buttons? Well, for that, you'll need to import the button class from discord.ui. And instead of importing the button class, you could also directly use it by discord.ui.button, like this. And if you look at the discord.py or pycord examples, you'll see that this is being used everywhere. But in my opinion, it looks a little bit cleaner if we don't have this and it's just button. You can choose whichever one you want. So this is how we create an instance of the button class. And let's store it in a variable. And let's look at the parameters that we can pass in. So if you hover over this, you'll see that there are many parameters, but I'll explain them. So the first one is simply label, and this is the text that you see here. So let's call this click me. So the second parameter lets us define how the button looks like, and that is defined with style. And this takes in discord.button style. This is an enum, and there are many values that you can have here. And like we just discussed, there is primary, secondary, and you can also refer to them with their aliases, green, red. And if you'd like to know about all of these, the best way is to look at docs. And like I said before, I'm using Pycord. So I have the Pycord docs opened here, and you can open discord.py 2.0 docs as well. So what we'll do is go to our enum reference. So that would be in API reference, and scroll down to enums. And here we can control F and find button style. And there you go. So these are all the styles that we have: primary, secondary, success, danger, link, and all the colors as well. And these are exactly the ones that we saw before. So it's always good to refer to the docs if you don't know about a new class. And everything has been documented. So let's actually scroll down here and you'll find the bot UI kit. And this is where you can find the button that we're defining here. So we have the style, which is a button style. And as you can see, the default for this is secondary. So by default, it'll be gray if you don't specify this. But since we are specifying this, let's specify it to be green. I personally prefer green over using something like success, because I think it's easier to understand that it's green instead of success, because you might need to think, but here you can directly see that it's green. Anyway, if I had not defined this is actually optional, this would be gray. And let's also have an emoji, and you can think of this as the third parameter. And emoji can take, let's go back to the docs and see, emoji can take partial emoji, or a string. So you can pass in an emoji by doing something like bot.getEmoji, but we can directly use a string as well. Now here we can have either a custom emoji or a Unicode emoji, and this is a tip for Windows users. You can open a default emoji picker by pressing Windows key and semicolon, and let's just choose a wave here. So there you go. And you can also have a custom emoji like this, so custom name and ID of the emoji. So I think most of you guys know how to get the emoji link. Now if you don't know how to get this, it's as simple as going to Discord and typing your emoji. So that would be, for example, let's say we have sad, and I choose the emoji, and before the emoji I'll add a backslash and send it, and you'll get it in the format. So this also works for animated emojis. So let's just copy this and you can have it right there. But for now, let's just have the wave Unicode emoji. Now there are other parameters as well that you could pass here, but we'll talk about them a little bit later. So this is our button here, and by the way, label is also optional. Emoji is optional as well, as you can see in the docs here. And as you can see, everything here else is optional as well. So you could completely remove everything and send an empty button as well. In most cases, you'll have the label, but sometimes you might just need an emoji. So as you can see here, I made a Pokemon Red on Discord. So for that, I needed a gamepad, and I just had emojis. So it's as simple as just having the emoji here. So that's it for the button. Now, how do we send this button? Is it something like components and a list of buttons, maybe? Well, this is not exactly how Discord.py handles this. What you need to have is, instead of components, is you'll need to construct a view. So let's import that. And again, you can have discord.ui.view as well. Everywhere that you go, you'll see discord.ui.view, but I'm using view just like this. So what a view is basically a manager for components. And if you didn't know, components are buttons and select menus. And soon there will be a text input component as well. So I'll make a video on that. And I'll also make a video on select. So make sure you're subscribed so you can know everything about components. So knowing about view is important. It manages all the components and it manages timeouts and other stuff as well. We'll talk about timeouts in a bit. So for now, let's just create a simple view with no parameters. And what we need to do is view.addItem, and we just add the button as an item to the view, and then we send the view. There needs to be a comma here. This is the content and this is the view. Now a tip for Pycord users, you can directly have button here, and you can have as many items that you want, but this is something that you cannot do with discord.py, so I will remove that, and we will continue using add item. Now there also exists remove item, so view.remove item, in case you need to remove an item, which you might need to in the future. So this is good to know. And you can also look at view here. Let's look at the docs. These are all the methods available, and we'll talk more about them in a bit. And that's it. That's how simple it is to send a button. And you can have as many buttons as you want. You could take this and add another button, view.addItem, and then send the view. So let's try it. Let's save it and let's run it. So python main.py. I don't have it on ready, so it won't really say anything, but it creates a PyCache folder. I just noticed that. Anyway, let's go back and let's try running the hello command. And there you go, we get our button. And nothing really happens when we click it because we haven't defined anything, so we'll do that in just a bit. But before that, let's try sending more buttons. Let's try sending a different button. Let's call it button 2 and button 1. So we'll send these. We cannot do that actually. We need a new view.addItem button 2. All right, let's send maybe something else. Let's send by the way, if you remove this, like I said before, this is gray by default, so let's just do that. And we can also remove the label as well, so you can just send an emoji. And let's send a custom emoji. So we'll copy this sad. All right, and you can have all of the other styles as well. You can send a button without any emojis as well, just to make it 100% clear that it is optional. Danger. So we are using button style dot red here, or danger. You can use whichever one you want. And that's it. Let's also send a link button. This might be something new. So I'll just complete this in a sec. Button 3 and button 4 as well. This is where this gets a little long. So what you can do is directly pass it in if you're using Pycord. So button 4. This is a special type of button where you can specify the URL. So let's have, for example, Google. And let's call it go to Google. Let's run this again. We have added all our buttons here. Let's send this. Let's run the command again. And we get all of these buttons here. We get the click me button, we get the danger button, we get the emoji button by itself without any label, and we get the go to Google link button, which when you click on, it'll take you to Google. So you can click on yes and it'll take you to Google. Now you may be wondering if you can have an emoji on this. So if we have emoji, well, let's just try it ourselves. This is what you can do. If you have any questions, just try it, see if it works. Let's go back, let's run the command again, and there you go, it actually does work. So you just tested it. However, you cannot choose a style for this. You cannot do this, I think. Let's run it and see if it works. I don't think it will. As you can see, it didn't work. This style is actually discord.buttonstyle.link. So by default, or I can say it overrides it, so it's link. So you cannot have green or red or blue link buttons. They can just be gray. So that's basically it. That covers all of the buttons that you can send. Now let's look at how we'll respond to button clicks. So I went ahead and deleted all of the extra buttons, and I just have the click me button here. Now, if you were using some other library, like Pycord components or Discord components, you are used to doing something like await bot.wait for button click, and then you have some checks checking the custom IDs of the buttons. I haven't talked about custom IDs yet. I will talk about them in a bit. So that's what you did. Then you responded. Now you see, this makes it really complicated. Views make it so much easier. So what you can do is directly define a callback. And how do you do that? Well, let's define a callback. You can call it button callback. And this takes in one parameter, that is the interaction. And what we do inside is I'll just type it out. Interaction dot response dot send message. Hi. And once we have defined the callback, what we can do is directly assign it as the button's callback. That's it. Now, I haven't told you guys anything about interaction. Some of you might know this, some of you might not know this, but I will explain it in a bit. But you can guess what's happening. When this button is clicked, what happens is this function is run. This is the callback that's run. And what we do is we respond to that interaction by sending a message, which is simply hi. So let's see if our guess is correct. When we send this command here, we can click on the button and hopefully, there you go, we get hi. So what just happened? Well, I need to explain to you what interactions are. Now, interactions are basically what you can guess from the word itself. An interaction occurs when a user does something to interact with the bot. So, for example, they click on a button, they select something from a select menu, they run a slash command. That is also an interaction. So this is basically the interaction. So again, docs will help you here. So let's go to the docs and go all the way and find interaction. There you go, interaction. Now, interaction has a lot of attributes. You have the guild IDs, channel IDs, data, and a lot of stuff that you do not need to worry too much about. All you need to know for now is there exists an interaction or response, which you can use to respond to the interaction, and there exists a follow-up, because response can be done only once, as the docs say clearly here, so you can use follow-up. So I'll just explain what this does. We have interaction or response, so we get this interaction response object. So if you take a look at the methods available in interaction response, there is defer, which is basically saying that I acknowledge this interaction, but I will respond to it later. So as you can see here, this is typically used when the interaction is acknowledged and a secondary action will be done later. This is another thing that you should know. You need to respond in 3 seconds. If it takes more than 3 seconds to respond, it will say interaction has failed. Alright, let's look at the other methods. We have send message and we have edit message. Send message simply responds to that interaction by sending a message, and edit message is more commonly used with components, and this simply edits the original message of the component. So what you can have is edit message as well. What this would do is edit this message that we just sent, right? And this wouldn't really do anything because it's the same content. But what you could do is something like content is hello there, right? And this would actually edit it. And this would not affect anything else other than the content. If you want to remove the button when somebody clicks the button, like for example, you completely want to remove the button, what you can do is say view equals none. What happens is when you click this button, it will edit the original message, which is this message. It'll say hello there, and it'll remove the view. So let's try this as well. So when we click this button, what will happen is it edits this message. Now it just says hello there, and that's it. Now there are some other methods as well, like send autocomplete result. This is not related to components at all. Pong is rarely used. And is done lets you know if you've already responded. So for example, if you do something like I edit the message, then I want to send another message, then I cannot do something like interaction.response dot send message. All right, what I need to do is follow up. So we'll look at that as well. Interaction, follow up, and follow up returns a webhook. So you can use it like follow up dot send message, and that's basically it. So for example, if you have responded once, you can respond again with follow up. So let's do that as well. We can say hi. So I just noticed that it's actually called send and not send message. Now this should work. Now when we click this button, you'll see that we edit the message and then we follow up. So that's how you respond to button callbacks. Now this is totally fine, you can do this, but it's really awkward. So instead, what's much more common is subclassing this view class or even the button class. Let's look at each one of them. Now the easiest one to understand is subclassing button. So let's do that. Class my button. Now again, you need to know object-oriented programming. My button. We will have to subclass button, which is this core.ui.button. What you can do is you can copy this callback and remove this and paste it here, and instead this will be called just callback. This has to be exactly callback, and again, since it's a class, you'll need self, and that's pretty much it. Now what we can do is use my button, construct that instead, and now it'll automatically have the callback. Now what you can also do is override the init method and directly initialize the parent class with these parameters. So this is how it works, and that's it. And here you can also define other attributes, so any attributes that you want, name or something else as well. So what's a little more common is maybe, for example, you have a green button, right? So this is a style, and you can pass in the label in the init. So what happens is in the button here you can say, so in the init you'll actually have to change this to green button and say click this. So what you've done is actually copy this and paste it here. Now what you've made is you can remove the emoji as well. You can make it optional. You can do so much if you know just basic object-oriented programming. You can make this like default, maybe none or something, right? Maybe this is none by default, and you pass it in. You can do so much. I'll just remove this for now. And what you've done right now is make a simple green button that when you click on, you can change the label. So you can create as many green buttons as you want. So as you can see, it's really convenient. You can just take this class. This is not dependent on any other code. So what you can do is reuse this class anywhere in any bot. That is, you can just take this and paste it in some other bot and directly create buttons like this. So let's also try this once and see that everything is working. So when I run the command, we get this, and when we click on it, it says hello there and hi. So it works as expected. Now let's look at another way to do this. Instead of subclassing buttons, what we can do is subclass the view itself. And now we'll talk more about views as well. So let's do that. We can delete all of this code actually. So there goes all the code. But before we do that, let's copy this because we'll need this. So what we do is remove this button here as well. And we'll also remove this add item. So what we'll do is create my view, which will be a special view. So class my view, which inherits from discord.ui.view, right? We don't need to override the init for now because we aren't passing anything here, but we'll do that later. So for now, what we'll do is create our button. Now the way to do this is actually to use a decorator, discord.ui.button. This time b in the button is lowercase. Inside of this, we just have the same parameters as well. So label is click me or click here. Emoji is the wave emoji. And then we just define the callback. And the parameters are self because this is a class, so self needs to be there. And then we have the button itself and interaction. All right, So what you can do is do the exact same thing. Interaction.response .send message. Hello there. Alright. And this is another way to do the same thing. Right? There are so many ways to do it. You can choose any way to do this. I prefer using views or sometimes subclassing buttons. I rarely construct buttons directly inside of my commands. I just have views manage everything. So that's it. Let's try this again. Let's run it. So when we run the command, you'll see that we get the button, and when we click on it, we get hello back. And there you go. Now let's look at some other attributes of button. What you can do is, for example, get the button. Now this is the button that was clicked, right? So you'll know that the label is click here. What you can do is actually change the label. Wow. You can also disable the button if you want. You can change anything about the button directly. But what you have to do, maybe something like change the style or change the emoji. You can do everything that you can, but if you just leave it like this, nothing will happen. Alright, you will need to edit the message, and if you don't want to edit the content, you can just leave it as it is. You will need to edit the view, and what you'll do is pass self, because self is the view itself, and that's it. It will edit the button. Let's try it. Now when we click on the button, we'll see that the button name changed, but it didn't get disabled. Let's look at why it didn't get disabled. Because I didn't actually call it disabled. It is actually disabled equals true. Button.disabled equals true. Let's run it again. Hopefully this works this time. Click on the button, and there you go. The button is disabled. I cannot click on it, but it did change the label. So you can edit the buttons if you want. You can also edit other buttons inside this view. For example, if you had something like another button, let's just copy this button and let's have danger. Danger, and we don't need an emoji here, right? And let's call this danger button callback. So what will happen is it'll send something like just exclamation marks. Now how do you change these other buttons? Well, the view, which is self in this case, has an attribute called children, and this is a list of all the items that the view has. So for example, any buttons that you have could be inside here. Now how do you find this button from this list? Well, you can just do a list comprehension, or you could use filter. I'll just use a list comprehension. So here I'll say x for x in self.children if x dot. Now here is where custom ID will help you. Now if you look at the docs, you'll see that custom ID is a parameter that each button has, the ID of the button that gets received during an interaction. If this button is for a URL, it does not have a custom ID. So what it says is basically that the custom ID can be used as an ID. So what we can have is we can define an ID and call it, for example, danger. And we can say custom ID equals danger. And that's it. We found the button, so we can get the first button which matches this, and we can take that as our button. And what we can do is use this like this. Let's call it button 1. All right, so now what will happen is if you click here, it'll make this danger button turn into wow and make it disabled. You can remove this as well. You can say no more danger or something. And let's try it. Let's see if it works. Now we've already created some kind of a mini game where if you click on danger, it sends these exclamation marks, and if you click on the button here, it'll disable this button and no more danger. So you can actually make it more fun by doing something like, if you click on this button, it'll remove all of the items in the view. So what you can do is, well, one way to do it would be for I in self.children, self.remove item I. This works, but a much better way to do this is literally self.clear items. If you take a look at the docs, you'll see that this method is available to us and it removes all the items from the view. Like I said before, you will need to say view equals self. Now this is a mini game. You click on danger and you lose. All the buttons are lost. And if you click here, there is no more danger. And there you go, you already know a lot more about buttons. Now let's take a look at timeouts. So view has a parameter timeout, and by default it is 180 seconds. What this means is that in 180 seconds, if no one has clicked or interacted with this view, it will stop listening to button clicks. And there also is an event for on timeout. So async def on timeout. So I just auto typed it for me. I'm just going to remove this. Basically, this says it returns none. So on timeout, you can close things if you want. You can do whatever you want on timeout. We'll talk more about this in a bit. Let's actually override the init method. Now here, it is required. You have to initiate the superclass. So this is mandatory. If you don't do this, it will not work properly. So here what you can do is say, for example, timeout is equal to, let's say my view will have a default timeout of 200 seconds, or let's say 10 seconds. And to actually see what's happening, what we can do is pass in, instead of timeout, we can pass ctx in, and we can take that in as a parameter and say self.ctx equals ctx. And here what we can do is say self.ctx.send timeout. All right, we can make it faster, maybe 6 seconds or 5 seconds. So I forgot to await this. Let's run it again. Now when I run this command, I need to wait for 6 seconds. And while you're waiting, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. There you go, we get the timeout. Now there is another helpful event, async def on error. So here you have the error, you have the item, and you have the interaction. So what you can do is maybe send the error, await interaction dot response dot send message. Maybe you send the error as a string. You can do whatever you want. You can have an error handler inside of this. I'm not gonna make an error handler because I don't really need one. I'm just showing you guys that you can make an error handler here. And it also gives you the item where it occurred, so you know exactly what you need to do. So for example, if you purposely make something like this is a type error, so this will actually get triggered and it will be sent here. Let's see. So when we run this, you'll see that we actually get unsupported operand type, and for minus, string and int. So that's it for the error handler. I will just remove it because I do not need it, but now you know how to create an error handler. So I'll remove it. Now let's look at some other methods in Vue. So we have talked about children and timeout. We haven't talked about from message. View from message, you can actually guess what it is. You give it a message and it will construct a view. And you can read why this is important. It's because message.components is read only, and in order to interact or in order to use it, you actually need a view. So you can use this method. Let's look at the other methods. You have 3 is methods: is dispatching, is persistent, and is finished. So is finished is basically going to tell you if the view has finished interacting. Now there are 2 ways a view can finish interacting. Either it times out or you actually stop it. So this is how you stop a view manually. So what you can do is, maybe for example, if you click on danger, you stop the view. This will manually stop the view, and on timeout what happens is actually it stops the view. So you can do it manually as well, and once a view is stopped, it will be finished, so you can actually check if a view is finished or not. Another method is dispatching. You don't really need to know about this. You can look into it if you want, but an important one is persistent. Is persistent tells you if a view is persistent, and a persistent view is made by setting the timeout to none. And all of the components must have a set custom ID. So if you want a view to never timeout, you can set the timeout to none as well. Now, what is this wait method? Now, this wait method will wait till the view is finished. This is really useful. So for example, you want to do something else after this view has been sent. Maybe you want to wait for somebody to click a button. So how do you do that? Well, what you do is you await view.wait. So what this does is it waits for a view to stop, and either it can happen through a timeout or it could happen by manually stopping. So what you can do is, if you want to wait for a button click, you can, once the callback is done, you can stop the view, maybe store the result of the button. Like for example, I have 2 buttons. Maybe I have a value, right? Maybe I have something like self.value is none. I have 2 buttons where I separately keep the value and then I stop the view. Maybe here I set the value to clicked, and here I set danger or something. And what I can do is, after waiting for it, I will know that the view will have a value, and I can check for it. and I can see if the value is danger or not. So this is how you can wait for the view to finish. And by the way, another useful feature is that wait actually returns true if the view timed out and false if the view finished normally. What that means is that you can use it to check if it timed out or not as well. Store the result somewhere and check. If res, that means it timed out. Now let's talk about interaction check. What this is it'll basically run this check on each interaction. So what will happen is you can see that it auto completed this. I'm just going to remove this. Alright, so we get an interaction and it needs to return a boolean. So you'll return true if this interaction should be processed, and you'll return false if this interaction should be ignored. So what we can do is we can say, for example, something like interaction.user is equal to self.ctx.author. What this does is it makes sure that only the author can interact with the view. And if you want, you can actually specifically say if the author is not the person who is clicking the button, we can say await interaction the response dot send message. We can say, hey, you can't use that. Now you can make this private, that is only the person who clicked on this button, that is only the user of this interaction can see this. What you can do is set ephemeral to true, and then we can return false, otherwise return true. Alright, let's run it. In order to test this, I will go on my alt and see if it works. So now I'm on my alt, and now if I click on this, you'll see that it'll say, hey, you can't use that. And that covers up everything that there is about views. Now we're only left with one last thing, and that is the row in button. So what is this row? Well, the maximum amount of buttons that you can send is 25. 5 rows and 5 columns. So this will let you specify which row you want your button to go in. For example, now I've deleted everything that I had here before. I'll simply say self.add item. We'll create our button, and here let's give it a label. This is 1, and we keep the row as 1. Now rows go from 0 to 4 because they are 0 indexed. So the first row is actually 0. So let's do that. And you could copy this and have each you could use a loop, actually much better. So for I in range 5, this will generate 0 to 4. We'll make this label and row is this. Alright, now if I run this and show this to you, and as you can see, we have all the buttons in separate rows: first row, second row, third row, fourth row, and fifth row. And you can have 5 buttons in 5 columns as well. So what you can have is 5 of these like this. So you can have a nested loop. Again, let's do that. So you can have for j in range 5, and here what we'll do is make it, maybe let's say I comma j. So we have row comma column format, and I forgot a colon. Now when we run this, here we have our 5 by 5 grid going from 0, 0 all the way to 4, 4, and these are all the buttons that you can have. So you can specify the row, and it'll set the row that the button should go in. And by the way, if you're wondering, you don't actually need this. It will automatically work. It will still do the same thing by default. What it does is it handles everything on its own. How? It goes from here left to right. So it goes 0, 0, 0, 1. When you add a button, when you add an item, it will see if it can add it in this row itself as a column. When it reaches here, it sees that it cannot add a new button, so it creates a new row. So by default, even if you don't specify that, it works. So that's it. You now know everything about buttons and views as well. That's great. You can make whatever you want. You can create calculators. You can create what I just had before as well, Pokemon Red. You can do all of that, and you have all the tools available to you. You just need to be more creative and create whatever you want to create. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe. And if you have any questions, you can join my Discord server or post it in the comments below. My Discord server is in the description below as well, and it will be here in the screen as well. You can It's probably easier to just go to the description and join the server there. And that's it. I'll meet you in the next video.